From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. So after funding the government, what is next on the lame duck agenda? Maybe, Kim, it is the bills to reform the Electoral Count Act. And recall, there is a House bill, there is a Senate bill, and this relates to the 1887 Electoral Count Act, which governs the way that Congress counts the Electoral College on January 6th every 4 years. And I've looked at these bills, and to me, there are some improvements in the House bill, but either of them I think would be better than the status quo. Both of the bills clarify that the vice president who presides over the joint session of Congress when lawmakers are counting the Electoral College votes, that the vice president does not have any formal role other than presiding. He can't throw out electors on his own. He can't delay the proceedings. There are other sort of procedural reforms in here. And Kim, to my mind, either of these bills would be better than the status quo, and it would be better to go into 2024 with a clarified procedure for how this Electoral College counting process is going to take place. And the outrage to me here is, why did we have to wait so long from last January 6th, the January 6th Capitol riot, to get here? Why are we doing this in the lame duck session, since this was the obvious response to it all along? And it is not clear to me that if this waits until next year, when Speaker McCarthy takes over, that this is going to be a priority for the Republican House.
Yeah, I mean, outrage indeed. And the reason we are still sitting here is because Democrats wanted this as an issue. You know, we had what happened on January 6th. We had the former president refuse for some time to engage in the normal transfer of power and instead egg on Vice President Pence to assume a role that even the vice president firmly believed was not his under the Constitution. So we all know, as you just aptly described, why this needs to happen. And yet Democrats, they wanted to campaign on this issue, how Republicans are extremists, and they wanted it as an excuse to argue for their federal takeover of state election laws and various other priorities instead of just getting on and passing this. They control the calendar. They still do in both the House and the Senate, and they have for the past 2 years. So this is the issue. Now we're down to the point where, because they have so little time and because they have so much to do, they have a rail strike on their hands. They have all of these spending bills on their hands. They've decided to move ahead with the same-sex marriage bill. That this is again getting shunted to the side, and the newest discussion is that perhaps they will simply attach it to some other must-pass bill. Of course, the problem there is that some of these other must-pass bills might not pass this year because of the lack of time. And in particular, I'm talking about the National Defense Authorization Act, which Kate referenced earlier, which is the policy bill that sets out military policy each year. Normally, Congress always passes that. It's a priority, but it again is being held hostage to too many different priorities right now in a very short period of time.
The defense bill, the NDAA, as it's often called, is where I was going next. And Kate, as Kim describes, this is a bill that Congress generally passes every year. What's at stake in it this year?
Well, Kyle, there are a number of things that the bill would authorize. The House and Senate are still working out exactly the details of it, but there's a 4.6% pay raise for service members in both the drafts of the bill. That's only about half of inflation, but it's still useful, and that is becoming more relevant as the military is having pretty historic recruiting problems. There are also a number of debates over how many ships and aircraft to retire. The Biden administration proposed retiring a bunch of Navy ships. Congress doesn't want to allow it. That is becoming a huge flashpoint. But in general, it's more of what we're describing, which is it gets going on new projects that the Pentagon wants to do and increases procurement numbers for aircraft, undersea vessels, long-range fires. It really is, like Kim was describing, the policy bill that is later appropriated with a spending bill. But Congress has generally been able to pass it every year, and they try to tack on a variety of things because it's one of the only bills that can pass Congress. So the question is whether they'll be able to do that before they wrap up in December, or if they'll wait until January. But the NDAA also really just includes, in general, it's really a top line increase of over what President Biden requested. I believe it's about $45 billion in the Senate bill over what the president asked for. And to have Congress rejecting the president's budget requests as insufficient on such a large level is really notable. And so you do want to get this bill passed and to get that underlying money appropriated, because I think there's pretty broad bipartisan consensus that, Russia is on the march in Ukraine and China looks more likely to take Taiwan all the time. And we need to start making some investments in our military posture to try to deal with these proliferating threats. So that is, I think, a lay of the land on why hopefully this NDAA gets done pretty quickly.
Meanwhile, if that weren't enough on the agenda, there is some talk of Democrats trying to raise the debt ceiling unilaterally. There is a debt ceiling deadline looming sometime, I believe, in 2023. And Kevin McCarthy has suggested that the Republican House next year might use that as leverage to get some Republican priorities, as parties often do when we have divided government. And so the opportunity here, Kim, this is something that Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has talked about, is getting this done by Democrats alone. They can do a clean debt ceiling increase without having to compromise on anything that Republicans want. Is this something that you foresee happening, or is this the thing that will end up stuck there on the back burner?
Well, I find myself in rare agreement with Janet Yellen that it would probably be the smart thing for Democrats to do, because we go through this way too often. To the extent we need to raise the debt ceiling, it's because Treasury has to issue debt in order to cover spending by Congress. Okay, these are commitments Congress has already made, and this is simply Treasury keeping up with their spending appetite. So it's Congress's duty to do this. But it's a great temptation for parties of both sides, at least in the past, to use the debt ceiling as a form of leverage, especially when there's divided government, to essentially say, look, we're not going to raise the debt ceiling and therefore put you at risk of default unless you agree to do this for us and this for us. And there has been some discussion among Republicans in particular attempting to use this hold it hostage in order to try to force the administration into agreeing, for instance, to get rid of the giant infusion of cash it gave to the IRS recently to turbocharge its tax enforcement. That's the main thing that I have heard so far. The problem with these standoffs is that they usually don't end well for anyone as the threat of default looms. There's a lot of, pounding on tables and gnashing of teeth, and often the hostage takers end up having to step back because of the potential fallout. I think Kevin McCarthy is still weighing whether he's going to use that. There's some push in his caucus to do so, but he may not want to do that fight. Nancy Pelosi could just take this off the table and Chuck Schumer by getting it done in the Senate. But as mentioned, they seem to have other priorities top of mind, and they're running out of time. So I just don't know if there's going to be the capacity to get it done.
Thank you, Kim and Kate. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.